Sometimes life breaks a person so completely that even hope forgets their name. Jake Rock had become one of those forgotten men. A widowed father, he'd already lost everything that made his world steady. His wife, his career, his home's warmth, and now the last thing keeping him breathing was on the line: custody of his 8-year-old daughter, Emma. He lived in a small, cold house on the outskirts of Millbrook, a town that remembered his downfall like a scar it liked to trace. His only companion was Ranger, a retired K-9 police dog who seemed to sense Jake's pain better than any human ever could. That September afternoon, what started as an ordinary walk with Ranger became the moment Jake's shattered life collided with a secret buried in the dark for decades. When the leather leash snapped, Ranger ran toward an old abandoned farmhouse everyone in town whispered about but no one dared to enter. Jake followed, unaware that what waited inside that house wasn't just a discovery. It was a reckoning. Beneath those rotting floorboards, in the silence of a forgotten basement, Jake would find 12 missing children the world had stopped looking for. And in that moment, the man everyone counted out would become the man the world couldn't stop talking about. 3 years earlier, Jake Rock had been the man everyone respected. A construction foreman with hands that could build anything and a smile that came easily when his wife Sarah laughed. But one night, a drunk driver, a red light, and 17 seconds tore it all away. Sarah's death shattered him in ways no one around him understood. The drinking started quietly, then consumed everything. He lost his job, his savings, and eventually his dignity. His in-laws, wealthy, powerful, and judgmental, filed for custody of Emma, painting him as an unstable, broken man unfit to be a father. And in many ways he was. But Emma, with her stubborn smile and her mother's eyes, never stopped believing in him. She still held his hand at the grocery store when people whispered behind his back. She still drew crayon pictures of the three of them together, as if love could hold someone who was gone. When the court date loomed, Jake knew he didn't have money, power, or anyone on his side. All he had left was love for his daughter, and a dog who hadn't stopped watching that old farmhouse every time they walked by. The Witmore farmhouse was a skeleton of history, sitting at the edge of town like a dark memory no one wanted to claim. It had been abandoned for decades, swallowed by weeds and silence. Locals said the house was haunted. Children dared each other to touch the rusted gate but never went inside. That day, Ranger's ears perked up before Jake even saw the house. And then, with a force Jake didn't expect, the leash snapped. The dog sprinted through the gap in the fence into the shadows of the house. Ranger. Jake shouted, heart pounding, lungs burning as he chased him. The front door, which had been boarded for years, stood open. Inside, sunlight filtered through broken windows, lighting up the dust like suspended ghosts. The air smelled wrong. Fresh footprints scattered across the floorboards. Food containers, blankets, someone had been here. As Jake followed the sound of Ranger's whine deeper inside, a second sound emerged, a voice, high, shaky, a child's voice coming from below. When he knelt, pried open the loose planks, and shone his phone's light down, he saw a wooden ladder disappearing into darkness. And in that darkness, the world changed. What Jake found in that basement would echo through every news broadcast in America by nightfall. 12 children, boys and girls, different ages, huddled together like shadows that had forgotten the sun. The air was damp, the walls stone, mattresses, buckets, blankets, and 12 pairs of eyes that flinched at every sound. Ranger moved forward first, steady, calm, trained to protect. Jake knelt, his voice soft, almost cracking. "I'm not here to hurt you. My name's Jake, and this is Ranger." A small girl, no more than 10, stepped forward and whispered, "Are you with them?" Jake shook his head. "No, but I'm getting you out." They didn't believe in the police. They'd been told no one would come for them. But Jake dialed 911 anyway, voice shaking, heart thundering. Within minutes, the farmhouse filled with flashing lights and chaos. Officers descended the ladder. Paramedics carried children into the sunlight. And Jake Rock, the man who had once been invisible, stood at the center of a miracle no one saw coming. The next morning, Jake's small, forgotten street didn't feel like home anymore. News vans were lined up along the sidewalk, cameras flashed, microphones waved in his face, and strangers were saying his name like it had always mattered. The man who once felt invisible was now the center of a national story. Reporters called him a hero, police called him a witness, and the world was hungry for every detail. But beneath the noise, Jake F. felt something heavier, a quiet, growing weight that told him this was bigger than a single rescue. Detective Sarah Chen stood on his porch, her coffee steaming in the cold air, eyes serious. "Jake," she said, "this isn't just a house with kids. You stepped into something that's been hiding for years." She told him the Witmore farmhouse had a history, a long paper trail connected to the Millbrook Children's Foundation, a foster care program shut down decades ago under suspicious circumstances. Too many missing kids, too many unanswered questions. As the hours passed, the media looped the same images of the house, the flashing sirens, the children carried out into daylight. Words like trafficking, cover-up, and network echoed through every broadcast. Jake watched through the window as neighbors stared and whispered. He wasn't just a single father fighting to keep his daughter anymore. He was part of something that reached far deeper. And as he thought of Sarah, his wife who had grown up in foster care but never spoke of it, something inside him clicked. The place ranger had led him to wasn't just a crime scene. It was a doorway into a past that someone had worked hard to bury. The photograph on the table turned everything upside down. There she was, Sarah, 8 years old, standing in front of that same farmhouse, smiling faintly at the camera. The house where Jake had found those children wasn't just connected to a crime. It was connected to her. She had been one of them. All those years she avoided talking about her childhood suddenly made sense. She hadn't been protecting her past. She'd been running from it. As detectives and federal agents dug into old files, names surfaced. Transfers that didn't exist, medical forms signed by familiar hands, and one name that burned like fire. Judge William Harrison, her father, Emma's grandfather. The man trying to take custody of Emma was part of the same foundation that had controlled Sarah's childhood. That night, Jake searched through her old belongings and found a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. Her handwriting trembled across every page. "I see them sometimes. They smile like nothing happened." Another said, "I can't ever tell Jake. If I do, everything will come back." She had carried this alone for years, afraid to speak. And now, through a broken leash and a dog's instincts, the truth had clawed its way back. The custody battle wasn't about protecting Emma. It was about control. Sarah had died with this secret, but Jake wasn't going to let it die with her. When the FBI got involved, everything exploded. What started as one basement in a small town turned into a full-scale investigation across multiple states. Records, properties, names, it all pointed back to a powerful circle that had been hiding behind foster care for decades. And at the heart of it all were the Harrisons. Judge William and Margaret Harrison, the people who had nearly taken Emma from him. The woman the children called the nice lady wasn't a stranger either. Lucy Morrison had grown up in that very system. She de-survived it, then helped it continue. She fed and comforted the children, but she was part of the machine, and she refused to talk to anyone except Jake. She trusts you, Detective Chen told him, because you were the one who walked down there. Jake didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man who had been dragged into a storm. The custody case, Sarah's death, the farmhouse, it was all connected. The Harrisons hadn't just wanted Emma. They wanted to control him, but the truth was out now. They couldn't hide behind their power anymore. Jake knew this wasn't just his fight, it was Sarah's fight too, finally being brought into the light. Weeks later, the farmhouse stood behind police tape like a wound that couldn't close. The reporters were still out there, but Jake didn't care about the cameras anymore. He stood on the sidewalk with Emma's hand wrapped tight in his and Ranger sitting alert beside them. The people who had run this nightmare for decades were finally being exposed. Judge Harrison and his wife were in custody. The town that had once worshipped their name was forced to face the truth. Jake wasn't invisible anymore. He was the man who pulled a truth out of the dark that no one wanted to see. That night on his porch with Emma sleeping against his chest and Ranger curled by his feet, he thought of Sarah. She hadn't been able to tell him her past, but she had left pieces of it everywhere. In her silence, in her letters, in their daughter. "We found the light, buddy," he whispered to Ranger, his voice steady now. "But the dark's still out there." This wasn't the end of the story, it was the start of a fight he was ready for. If this story hit your heart, make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, and share it with someone who believes that the truth always finds its way out. Because tomorrow, I'll tell you another story, one that proves ordinary people can become the light in someone else's darkness.